Good evening. This is the Groton Board of Selectmen's meeting for Monday, December 4th, 2017. On our agenda this evening, we have announcements and to review the agenda, which we're doing, followed by a public comment period. And if you have questions for the board, you have up to 3 minutes to come to the microphone and ask your questions. For the record as well, before I continue on, Russ Harris of the Groton Herald contacted me earlier today to let me know that he was going to be recording this meeting on a tape recorder, and I'm just making that announcement. At 7:06, we have the town manager's report. We will consider ratifying and discussing the selectmen's agenda schedule. Consider ratifying the town manager's appointment of Carol Ann Sutton to the Commission on Accessibility. To discuss and take a position on an open meeting law complaint filed by Alan Hoke concerning an executive session held on October 23rd, 2017. That will be followed at 7:15 by a public hearing, which we are going to keep to that timeline on. So if we are involved in a discussion on anything else, we're going to have to suspend that discussion in order to read the public hearing announcement and open the public hearing. At 7:30, there's another public hearing on the Blood Farm earth removal permit. And under other business, anything else that needs to come up, liaison reports and minutes of the budget guidance meeting of September 25th, 2017, followed by regularly scheduled meeting minutes of November 13th, 2017. So, do any selectmen have any announcements? Mr. Town Manager, any announcements?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Public comment period time then. So, Ms. Ellen? Russ, could you pass Ms. Ellen the microphone, possible?
There used to be 2 handicap spots in the parking lot. Now there's only one. So I get here early so I can have a parking spot. And I was hoping we could put this other one back.
Why, we only have one now?
There was some construction and they took out the other spot, and the sign is up against the building and it hasn't been put back up yet. We will get that put back up.
So consider that will occur in the very near future.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments from anyone in the public? Seeing none, town manager's report.
Mr. Chairman, I would ask you to ratify my appointment of Carol Ann Sutton to the Commission on Accessibility to fill a vacancy caused by the resignation of James Buckholder.
Thank you.
The Commission is recommending that appointment. I've made it. Ask the Selectmen to consider ratifying that appointment.
Any questions from the board or public? Seeing none, a motion?
I move that we ratify the town manager's appointment of Carol Ann Sutton to Commission on Accessibility term, Mark?
June 30, 2018.
Term to expire June 30th of 2018.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Further discussion?
Is Caroline here?
She is not.
Okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, we received a complaint from Alan Hoke dated November 22nd, 2017, filing a complaint against the Selectmen in violating the open meeting law by holding an executive session on October 23rd, 2017. Under the Attorney General's guidelines, once the Selectmen have received the complaint, the Chair must disseminate that complaint to the members of the public body, which he did. The public body must meet to review the complaint within 14 business days, which is 20 calendar days. We're within that by meeting tonight. After the review, but within 14 business days, the public body must respond to the complaint in writing and must send the complainant a response and a description of any action the public body has taken to address it. At the same time, we must notify the Attorney General and provide them with a copy, him or her with a copy of the response. Now, you can delegate the drafting of the response to either me or Town Council, but you'll talk about that tonight. And then if the public body requires more time to review the complaint and respond, it may request an extension of time for good cause by contacting the Attorney General's office. Once you've made your decision, the complainant does have the right to appeal your decision to the Attorney General. I just wanted to outline the process so we know exactly what we're looking at. Basically, the complaint which you have in your packet before you, and I will get it up here on the screen for people to see. I want to read it into the record if it's okay with you, Mr. Chairman.
Please do.
The history of this intentional violation of the open meeting law is as follows. On October 23rd, Town Manager Mark Haddad asked the Groton Board of Selectmen to enter into executive session per Mass General Law, Chapter 38, Section 21A6, to consider the purchase, exchange, lease of real estate. The reason given was a pretext. The board voted to go into executive session not to discuss the value of real estate, but to discuss in secret the request of an entity named Indian Hill Music Center. That building permit inspection fees be capped at the sum of $400,000, which on information and belief is approximately $300,000 to $350,000 less than the 1.2% building permit fee assessed to commercial property projects in Groton per the Town of Groton Land Department fee schedule at line 26, which requires a permit fee of 1.2% as noted above. The board discussed Indian Hill's position that it wanted fees capped at $400,000 for fees and inspections. In other words, Indian Hill wanted an all-inclusive fee. Indian Hill's position was that it didn't know the project cost, and that even if it did know the project cost, it would decline to give the number because project cost was deemed to be intellectual property. The development in question is a massive music school and a 3,000-seat music performance center. On information and belief, the project cost is somewhere between $50 and $70 million. After discussion, the board voted 4-1 to reduce Indian Hill's fee and issue a building permit for an all-inclusive fee of $400,000, including all inspections. Indian Hill paid $340,000 by check after the vote, which included a deduction of $60,000 for concrete foundation permit fee previously paid. The board illegally went into executive session. The board's vote is illegal and void. So basically, there's a contention that the Board of Selectmen violated the open meeting law by going into that executive session. The board needs to determine whether or not you did that. When I received the complaint with the approval of the chair, I forwarded the complaint to town council, and I asked town council for an opinion on this alleged violation. You have a copy of the violation in your packet, and I believe the chair will read that into the public record. Mr. Chairman, I will say probably at the conclusion of you reading that, I'd like to table this for 30 seconds to open and continue the public hearing at 7:15. Thank you,
Sounds
Mr.
fine.
Chairman.
In addition, in Mr. Hoke's complaint, he was looking for a response in terms of a resolution and listed 5 items, and those 5 items are shown up on the board. But before we discuss whether or not we would entertain those things, we would need to determine, first of all, if we believe that we did violate the open meeting law. And if we say that we did, we could entertain those. If we say that we didn't, I don't believe that there's any need to entertain those. Is that correct, Mark?
I will tell you, with one of these fees, voiding out the building permit is not an option. I talked to town council, and the board authorized the fee. The building commissioner is the one that issued the building permit. That building permit was issued. It was a valid building permit based on the plan submitted. And so one of those action requests there is you can't do anything about that.
Okay.
I want to make that clear.
Well, still, we have to
Yep.
consider,
Yes.
based on town council's opinion, whether or not we believe we did. So
Yep.
I will read David Dineski, town council's response, dated Wednesday, November 29th, 2017. This was to our town manager. He says, Mark, I have reviewed the November 22nd, 2000.
Isn't that in the packet? Can't that be on the screen?
I'm sorry. I thought I had spun that up.
There you go.
I apologize.
It can be, but it still should be read into the record.
Yes,
Um,
right ahead. Sorry for the interruption.
I'm not sure where I was, but I'll say it again. I have reviewed the November 22nd, 2017 open meeting law complaint submitted by Alan Hoke regarding the October 23rd, 2017 executive session meeting of the Board of Selectmen in the matter of the building permit fee for the Indian Hill Music Facility to be constructed at 122 Old Air Road. This will confirm my previous opinion that it was permissible for the board to consider that matter in executive session under Clause 6 of Section 21A1 of General Law, Chapter 30A. Clause 6 authorizes an executive session meeting of a public body as follows: to consider the purchase, exchange, lease of real property, or value of real property, if the chair declares that an open meeting law may have a detrimental effect on the negotiating position of the public body. In its capacity as the chief executive officer of the town, the Board of Selectmen elected to take up the request of the Indian Hill Music to set the building permit fee for the large development approved for the Old Air Road site plan approval granted by the planning board in January of 2017. As a building permit fee is based on the estimated cost or value of the buildings and improvements to be constructed, and as the matter involved additional infrastructure improvements to be completed for the town's benefit, I advise that the board's consideration of the fee amount which would necessarily entail discussion of the value of the facility to be constructed, would relate to the value of real property and would implicate a negotiating position of the Board of Selectmen and could therefore take place in executive session pursuant to Clause 6. While there was an executive session meeting on October 23rd, there was also an open session meeting on that same evening pursuant to a posted meeting notice, at which the Board of Selectmen formally voted to set the building permit fee. It was that vote in open session which constituted the official action with respect to the building permit fee. You have also informed me that the Board of Selectmen discussed the building permit fee at a posted meeting on November 20th, 2017. For the reasons stated above, it remains my position that the executive session of October 23rd, 2017 was permissible under the open meeting law. Please contact me if you have any further questions on this matter. So, there's the opinion of town council. In addition to this meeting, were there any other executive sessions held as they pertain to this building permit fee? And if there was, I think we should address those.
I believe you met in executive session on October 10th.
October 10.
Yeah, so
And October
say that one more time?
17th. October 10th and the 17th. The 17th was pretty minor. All we did was discuss whether to release the minutes of October 10th.
So that had to be with executive session review. Good point,
Right.
Becky, that's right.
Yes.
But the two substantive were the 10th and the 23rd.
Yes.
And then the board had a full public disclosure of the entire matter on November 30th,
20th.
20th, I'm sorry, 20th. Did I say the
Right
30th?
before- Right
I meant
before
to-
Thanksgiving.
Correct.
Correct. All right, so,
And all minutes are posted of all those meetings, except is the 20th posted already?
It was actually the 13th, and that's in your packet tonight.
Okay. They're all there for your approval, and then they will be posted on the website. So all minutes relative to this, in addition to that, the subcommittee minutes taken, the subcommittee have been posted on the website as well with all relevant material.
all right. So we have a complaint before us, issued by a citizen of the town. We have an opinion by town council. We all understand at this board what transpired at that. Would you like to weigh in on whether or not you concur with town council or you concur with Mr. Hoke?
I just want to correct, it was November 13th, not the 20th.
Dawn said
And
that.
those are the minutes that we have to.
Dawn said that.
Any comments, Allison?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was always pretty clear that this was a topic and discussion that was reasonable for executive session, and nothing has changed my mind. I'm still comfortable with our decision and discussions.
Barry?
I'll defer.
Becky?
Yeah. I do want to say something here. I think it's clear, we've had a legal opinion that what we did was legal, and it was just mentioned, but we had sought a verbal opinion from town council before we entered executive session, so we didn't do it, blithely. But beyond the legal arguments, I do want to acknowledge that this has created a lot of turmoil in our community about what we've done. And I want to state for the record that although it may have been legal, and we have an opinion that says it was legal, I have heard and read a variety of opinion about this, and I'm less certain now that deliberating in executive session was a wise decision. Obviously, we can't undo that. When the board first received the complaint of the violation, I asked our town manager to immediately seek an opinion from the Attorney General. In part, well, mainly because I do think that the community deserves to have a clear reading on this. I learned that the board is required to have a public discussion before we can ask an opinion from the Attorney General, so that's what we're doing tonight. I do look forward to receiving that opinion from the Attorney General. I know that different lawyers can have different opinions. It's possible that the Attorney General will find that we did not act legally, and if so, that they will make recommendations, that the Attorney General will give us a recommendation about the remedy that they would suggest. I do think it's in our best interest as a community that includes Indian Hill music to get clarity on what transpired so that we can move beyond the current turmoil. I understand that Indian Hill has asked to come to one of our meetings and that that's going to happen.
I think December 11th, Mark, is that correct?
Next week,
Next
you
week.
have two things on the agenda relative to economic development. The Economic Development Committee is coming in with their annual report, and Indian Hill Music asked for time on the agenda to come in and discuss the economic impact of their facility here in Groton.
I
believe.
did also, for the record, send them a letter or an email today requesting any information for our packets for that meeting by the close of business on Wednesday. for inclusion.
It'll be in your packet when we send it out on Thursday.
We'll
Mr.
have-
Chairman, can I interrupt you for a
Yeah,
second?
we need to do this public hearing, so
Yep.
we're going to hold this for a
Yeah,
moment.
Mr. Chairman, the Board of Selectmen has scheduled a public hearing with the Board of Assessors within a regular Selectmen's meeting on Monday, December 4th at 7:15 PM at the Groton Town Hall, 173 Main Street, first floor meeting room. The purpose of this hearing is to receive comments on the issue of adopting a tax levy percentage for fiscal year 2018. All interested parties are encouraged to attend Groton Board of Selectmen. Mr. Chairman, I ask the Board of Selectmen to open the public hearing.
Motion?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion to suspend the
Nope,
public?
nope, I'm gonna have you take another vote right now really quickly. The Board of Assessors are not ready for tonight,
Oh.
so I'm gonna ask the Board of Selectmen to continue this public hearing to Monday, December 11th at 7:15 PM.
I move that we continue this hearing until 7:15 on Monday, the 11th.
Second.
Further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Done.
Okay, Becky, anything further?
So I just wanted, I look forward to getting that opinion from the Attorney General's office, and I do just want to remind people, all of the executive session minutes are posted on the website, and the minutes of the, prior to the executive sessions, the subcommittee that met with Indian Hill are also posted on the website for anyone to read.
Thank you.
You guys said that.
Jack, anything?
Well, I think certainly at the meeting of the 23rd, the options to go into executive session were for purchase, to discuss or consider purchase, exchange, lease, or value. I look at the minutes, we didn't discuss purchase, exchange, lease, or value of the property. We never talked about value. We simply talked about whether we wanted to further discount a fee that we had already discounted. That's all we talked about. It had nothing to do with the value of real estate. It had to do with the value, the amount of a fee. So I see nothing that suggests that we even gave passing consideration to value of real estate during that meeting. In fact, the meeting before, on the 10th, we started out talking about value, but roughly halfway through, there was a motion made to actually base the fee on value, and it was rejected 4-1. And from that point on in that meeting, we started talking about a fee and not value. We expressly stated that we would not talk about value. Consensus is that an alternative method is acceptable. Discussion would continue under executive session using the alternative method of not value. So I think we have I think we had a reckoning with ourselves that we entered into executive session the first time appropriately, arguably appropriately, to talk about value, but we quickly transitioned from value to a straight fee, independent of value, and never looked back. That's what I would say.
You have anything to add there?
I don't know if I can, because I was one of the ones who voted against entering executive session.
You can offer an opinion.
My opinion was that while the executive session might have been legal, I don't think it was appropriate given the thing that we were discussing. I had preferred, and I issued that opinion, I preferred that we hold this in full transparency, but I didn't feel it was appropriate to go against the will of 80% of the board when they decided they wanted an executive session, so I allowed it to continue. And in full awareness, I was acting chair that day, and it was my responsibility to declare or not declare. And I chose to declare based on the reality that I knew that there were 4 other members who wanted to proceed that way, even though I had a moment of doubt and almost decided not to. Not sure which way I feel now, but I don't doubt the legality of what we did on the first meeting. Slippery slope being what it was or whatever, did we continue that erroneously later? I can't articulate that.
All set? my position on this certainly is that the initial meeting that we entered executive session on October 10th was certainly within the bounds of executive session, as we were discussing what the value of the Indian Hill project would be, and then the associated building permit, based on what that value was purported to be, was the beginning points of the negotiation. And that was a very long meeting. If I recall, it went 2.5 hours-ish. And that at the follow-up meeting on the 23rd, while we had taken a position in terms of what a fee reduction might look like, we continued the discussion in terms of what the values would be to the town, in addition to
The values of what?
the
Okay.
Jack, you gotta let somebody speak.
I'm just trying to understand what you're saying, values
Well,
of.
you won't
Project
understand
questions
unless
down
you hear me
and ask
continue to
afterwards.
speak.
Okay.
Thank you. At any rate, the values concerning the price, everything started at a purported number. And all we could do was try and apply a number, and that number was going to come up somewhere between $650,000 and $750,000 based on a estimate of total building permit, total construction cost. In absence of having that cost and being able to apply an industry standard per square foot to that, we ended up going back and forth on that, and then started looking at, well, in addition to what the permit fee would be, what else is Indian Hill doing for the community? And the selectmen have the ability to reduce or waive a building permit fee. And because we were talking about the value, not just of the facility, but value of other things in the town, such as intersection improvements and then economic development, I still think it fell under this clause because we were discussing the value of the property. And the ultimate fee that we negotiated was predicated on an initial interpretation of a permit fee between $650,000 and $750,000. So therefore, I believe that we follow town council's recommendations. I will have to agree with Becky and Barry to a certain degree that this is ground that I have never covered as a member of the Board of Selectmen in terms of negotiating a permit fee. And I think we've learned some valuable lessons of transparency as a result of this discussion. And we will continue to have discussions about the impacts of the board having reduced the building permit fee. However, I do not believe that we broke or violated executive session. So that's my position on this.
One thing for the public record that I think Selectman Pine made very, very clear is that when you first went into executive session, we had checked with town council before we even brought that issue before the Board of Selectmen. The board did not enter into it on a whim. You had sought advice before you entered into executive session. I think that was a very important statement that Selectman Pine made.
Yeah, in fact, the first executive session was called by me in consultation with Becky. It was to update the board on the effort to establish a project cost and to seek guidance from the board on establishing a project cost so that we could go forward with a permit under the assumption that we would base a permit on a project cost, and to tell the board that we were having trouble getting to a project cost. As I mentioned, halfway through that meeting, we stopped talking about project cost, and in fact, we stopped talking about value of property. Josh, you talk about value, but it doesn't, we're not allowed to go into executive session to talk about the value of someone's contribution to the town in the form of road construction, or the value of the contribution of the town in economic development. We're allowed only to talk about the value of real estate. And if you can point somewhere to me in the session, in the executive session notes of the 23rd, where we ever talked about the value of real estate, I might consider saying that we didn't violate the open meeting law. But I don't think you can.
We discussed the value of real estate in terms of projected project costs, and correct me if I'm wrong, somebody, between $50 and $70 million, and that based on a 1.2 multiplier percentage of that number, we came up with, based on quality, we came up with a number that the permit fee would be. And I believe that was somewhere in the neighborhood of $750,000.
We did that in the meeting of the 10th. Never did we talk about value in the meeting of the 23rd.
I think that we actually, there was a brief discussion of value at the meeting on the 23rd when, I think it was Barry, said, if they don't build the large concert hall, we will only get a fee of 180,000, and I said, is that based on 1.2%? And you said yes, so you must have had some information about what the value of the project was without the large concert hall. So, I mean, that did happen on the 23rd. But one thing I want to say is, it is true that in our first session on the 10th, we went in still trying to figure a value that we could calculate a fee from. We were informed in that meeting, I think the minutes show, that all of a sudden there was a time pressure on us that we had not been aware of before, that Indian Hill was about to stop the project if they didn't, if we didn't come up with something that they could agree with. And I don't think that's a good excuse, but I think that explains, as I look back on it, a little bit of how we went in a slightly different direction than we started off in.
Fair enough. Anything further from this board? Mr. Hoke, I know that your complaint speaks for itself in terms of writing. Do you have anything in addition that's not within the complaint that you would like to add?
Yes.
Can you please use the microphone?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. I filed my public open meeting law violation because it's apparent to me as a citizen of this town and also as a lawyer that the board illegally went into executive session. This statute, the words have already been read into the record. I don't need to repeat it, but the statute is designed to protect the negotiating position of the town when the town is looking to buy or sell real estate. There was nothing like that going on with respect to Indian Hill's request to have you entertain a many $100,000 fee request. And if you think about it, in order for town council to come up with a position that says this was an appropriate use of the executive session, anybody in town who ever seeks a fee request, from now until the second coming of Christ, can come in here and ask that this board go into executive session to discuss that their building permit fee be reduced. That is obviously a silly proposition, and we wouldn't expect that to happen. It shows you that the interpretation of the law provided by town council is strained and simply does not apply to the facts in this case. I've looked at the meeting minutes of October 23rd, as have all of you, and I don't see anything in there at all where the town is talking about buying or selling real estate in its own name. That is what the statute is designed to protect. Similarly, when you go into executive session to talk about union negotiations with any of the public sector unions that have employees in this town, your negotiating position has to be kept confidential, because if it was public knowledge, the entity in question could use it against you. That is what the statute is designed to protect. And therefore, I vehemently disagree with town council's interpretation. I think they acted to cover for you. I think they've given you a lame excuse to call yourselves to say that you acted within the law, when I think it's clear under any reasonable interpretation of the statute that you simply did not do so. And like Ms. Pine referred to in the meeting minutes of October 23rd, she felt bullied during this process, and she wasn't the only one. With respect to Mr. Haddad's statement earlier that you can't avoid the fee, I've already called the Attorney General's office, and the Attorney General's office has informed me that yes, when the board meets illegally in executive session, it has the right to void the action that was taken during the illegal meeting. The illegal meeting was where the discussion was had that was then consummated in the form of a vote taken in the open portion of the October 23rd meeting that authorized the building commissioner to accept a reduced fee. I consider the board's illegal conduct on October 23rd, when it wrongfully went into executive session, to enable the Attorney General to void the action by the board. This is the fruit of the poisonous tree. It's a legal concept that's known among many lawyers. And I think that once the board's authority through the executive session discussions is voided, the authority given to the building commissioner to issue a reduced fee is similarly voided. And so we're going to go back to square one. All of this is highly unfortunate, and the last thing I want to do, which is not in my complaint, is this board had no right to consider in secret the request of Indian Hill to avoid the payment, like every other landowner in town has done, without exception, the payment of a building fee. It was just last year where the school committee and the school department, and Ms. Mnuchin, you're intimately familiar with that, was hammered repeatedly, trying, they were squeezed every last dollar out of their budget to fund school programs. The town shook itself out looking for money to fund programs for the town. And here, in secret, this board met illegally and gave Indian Hill a many $100,000 discount. Mr. Deegan is on record in one of the executive session meeting minutes, I think it was on October 10th, indicating that his value of the Indian Hill project was somewhere between 50 and 70 million. Let's assume, for purposes of our discussion, that it was a $70 million fee. That comes out to a building permit fee at 1.2% of $900,000. Also, if you add to that the additional fees that are imposed on applicants and people who build things for plumbing and electrical, those fees, I think, would come in excess of $100,000. And therefore, we're at a point where we were looking at $1 million in revenue to this town, at a point in time where everybody is scratching. The schools are looking for money, like I said. And I think it's extremely unfortunate that the board chose to go into executive session relying on poor legal advice, when this is exactly the kind of issue that should be discussed in the open, in the fresh air, and let the people of this town decide whether they're willing to give up $1 million of their tax revenue or their fee revenue and not leave it to you. I'm extremely disappointed. And therefore, I can see what's coming down the pipe here because you've provided yourself some cover, but I'm letting you know now, my intention at this point is to proceed with full speed ahead with an appeal to the Attorney General. I will be assembling a package. I will be getting a videotape of this meeting, and I'm going to do everything in my power to see to it that the Attorney General undoes this unjust and incorrect action of the board. Lastly, I don't want my comments to mean anything against you personally. I like you all very much. I think you're very nice people. And Mr. Deegan, you and I go back a long way. This transcends my feelings about you personally. Although I like and respect you, you've committed an egregious violation of the rules, and it's up to me and anyone else who wants to join me to see to it that this wrong is undone. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, before the board responds, I need the board to open a public hearing. So, Mr. Chairman, the Board of Selectmen has scheduled a public hearing on Monday, December 4th at 7:30 in the first floor meeting room of the Groton Town Hall, 173 Main Street, Groton, to consider a request for the renewal of an earth removal permit for Blood Farm on parcel 15, assessors map 106. All interested parties are encouraged to attend. I'd ask the board to open the public hearing.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion to suspend the public hearing to the conclusion of this discussion.
So moved.
Mr.
Sure,
I'm sorry.
second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Further discussion? All in favor?
Well, I don't think it'll take more than a minute.
I would like to conclude this discussion, please. It's,
Mr. Chairman, if I may respond to comments that Mr. Hoke made about
excuse
something
me,
I said.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Yes.
The Board of Selectmen did meet in executive session to discuss the building permit fee. That's one thing. But if you look at town council's opinion, while there was an executive session on October 23rd, there was also an open session on that same evening pursuant to a posted meeting notice. That meeting notice clearly said, review Indian Hill building permit fee in an open session, at which time the board formally voted to set the building permit fee. You did not set the fee in executive session. You set it at a legal, public, open meeting. Therefore, I'm not sure about the poisonous fruit argument. You did vote in public session. I want that to be clear
I
in the
think, I
record.
think your point's taken, and I think that everybody was a little bit apprehensive about discussing this in executive session. However, based on the advice of town council, we did go into executive session. Now we have an opinion from town council saying that we did something that was completely legal. And for the sake of full transparency, based on the actions that we took, my recommendation is going to be that this board not take action one way or another this evening on whether we broke executive session, and that we, on our own accord, should refer this to the Attorney General's office for interpretation and let the AG's office weigh in on this, thus saving Mr. Hoke the time and aggravation of going through and feeling aggrieved by a decision that we can forward on our own accord to the AG's office. So I think that would be the cleanest way, and I don't know if you all would agree with that or not.
Well, I agree, because I wanted it to happen immediately, so. And what is there to do? And our attorney has said we acted legally. So I don't think we need to vote on anything. I think we just need to send it on and let the Attorney General rule.
Well, we have a obligation to take action, I believe, from the complaint or forward it.
The board has to make a decision. If you look at the rules, the Board of Selectmen, after a review, but within 14 days, a public body must respond to the complaint in writing and must send the complaint in a response and description of any action the public body has taken to address it. The Board of Selectmen can vote. Your action would be to refer it to the Attorney General. So following that, that could be the action that you take.
Correct. Any further comments on how we should proceed?
I have a question.
What is it?
So the executive session was brought forward by Mr. Petropoulos, the original one. Given his comments now, does he feel that requesting an executive session was appropriate?
I actually wanted to state that. I think that it was arguably appropriate, but I also think there's a good argument that says it's a real stretch. And that's really all I can say about it. I cannot in good faith say that we should have continued that executive session once we voted to no longer consider the value of property. And I have to acknowledge and say to Mr. Hope that I believe that at least our second executive session was absolutely entirely illegal. And I would like to apologize to the public for both.
Before we go to you, Mr. Hope, anything further from board members?
I mean, to me, I think that, you know, I certainly agree with Mr. Hope that this whole situation at this point is just a difficult one and a distraction, more than a distraction, it's a real issue. You know, I think it's somewhat easy in hindsight to look at the minutes and say there was no discussion of this or of that. To me, there was still a reasonable expectation that there could have been, but, you know, I think it certainly makes sense to push this forward to the Attorney General. I don't know what, you know, typically in this situation, I would think one of the remedies that we would embrace would be to release the executive session minutes, which we've already done. You know, this certainly as comfortable as I was and still am that we acted appropriately, this isn't a super clear-cut thing, and I think that getting the Attorney General, you know, to opine makes sense.
I guess one of the questions I would have is, would we have done anything differently had it been in public? And, I mean, my answer is no. I would have done the same exact things, and I would have said the same exact things, and I would have, as I wanted to, as I felt from the beginning. And so, I'm not quite sure that I can, and then, more importantly, on the 20th, telling everybody what we did. Yes, it's a matter of procedural justice versus distributive justice. You know, it's kind of after the fact rather than during. But there was no intention to hide what we had done or were doing. But I don't know. I have a challenge there because I don't think being in public would have changed anything.
Well, I hear you. Hold on, we're gonna
At least
finish with
not mine.
I'm gonna finish with the board. And do you have something relevant that will help this discussion that we're having?
You might as well get it, you might as well get it now rather than later. I have a point of order first. The October 10 meeting minutes,
Microphone.
I'm sorry. October 10 meeting minutes, the meetings have obviously been approved and released. I noticed this earlier today. The meeting minutes refer to a spreadsheet/email from Ms. Menudian. And there's also a statement in the minutes that the email and spreadsheet shall be included in the minutes. They have not been included in the minutes I have, so I'd like to make a request to the clerk, that would be Ms. Menudian, that she immediately release that spreadsheet and email so that the public can find out what it is. It's right in the minutes.
It was a piece.
Yeah, I know what it was.
Secondly, I'm a little disappointed, Mr. Pease, that you would say you would have done the exact same thing, because that means that the people who come out here and express their opinions to you, regardless of how persuasive they are, and regardless of whether they're right, and regardless of whether everyone in the town agrees with them, you still would have voted the way you would have voted. The purpose of a public meeting is for the public to provide input to our elected officials, who then take those interests and statements into account. So to hear you say that our input would have resulted in no different decision from you, I think is extremely disappointing, and I would hope on reflection that you would agree that that was a misstatement on your part.
Oh, hold on, I get to respond right now. No, I get to respond right now.
I'm saying, it. Go ahead,
Because
please.
he said words I didn't say, and he assumed things he shouldn't have assumed. A, you assumed I took no public input, and that is absolutely farcically wrong. You do not know how many people gave me input. You do not know the unspoken citizens who came to me terrified that this project would go down in flames. You do not know any of the people who reached out to me, and it's not my duty to reveal any of that to anybody, as I would raise the confidence of anybody who would reach out to me with concerns or questions. The fact is, I did reach out to the public. I did have a hard decision on this, and I did reach the conclusion I reached based on public input.
Okay,
So,
wait.
no,
Let's not have a fight back
Take
and
it easy,
forth.
take
Let's
it easy.
address the issues, okay?
if he's gonna be factual, we can have an easy discussion.
Okay,
If
then.
he's gonna take things as a lawyer and spin them in things that aren't its own exist, that's not appropriate.
Are you all set with your rebuttal? Yes? Jack, do you have something on point
Yeah.
with what Mr. Hope brought
Yeah,
up?
very much. In fact, I think that is, in reflection, I take Mr. Hoke's point exactly. We effectively gave a tax subsidy to Indian Hill here. It's really a TIF of a different kind. A TIF is defined as a tax subsidy, and this is the same thing. It's just that we didn't wait for the money to, it wasn't a deferment of future money, it was a deferment of current money. And in a TIF, we asked the public for input on those sorts of things. In fact, I think the last TIF we offered, we went to town meeting and asked town meeting to vote on it. So I think something of that enormity does deserve public discussion. And I think had we surfaced that the public probably would have brought up concerns that we in our small group, with the small number of people that we talk to, can't possibly surface ourselves. And that's the value of having a public hearing. You get lots of input you can't generate on your own. And I can tell you that we would have had a very different discussion had we had a public hearing.
Okay, look, hindsight is 20/20 on this, and there's no question that we need an opinion on this from, in my opinion, again, the AG's office. We did meet in public session to approve the building permit fee. Granted, it was at the cafeteria prior to town meeting and not televised on TV, but that didn't preclude the ability for any member of the public to attend that meeting and to offer comment based on what we were doing. So while we may have discussed this in executive session, it certainly wasn't approved there. And Barry's point is very valid. I spoke with a lot of individuals about this, not about our executive session, but about the value of Indian Hill coming to town, or Indian Hill maybe not doing things to the degree that they got approval for at the planning board. We can talk about this and spin this any way we want. At this point, we have an alleged complaint that we violated the open meeting law, and it's my suggestion, rather than try and remedy it ourselves, we allow the higher authority to remedy it, and that is the AG's office. So would somebody like to offer a motion that we forward all pertinent and relative information along with Mr. Hoke's complaint to the Attorney General's office for interpretation on whether a violation occurred or not? That's what I would propose as a motion.
So moved.
Motion's been made and seconded. Further discussion?
I'll just end up voting no to this, in that I just want to state that because I believe we have the obligation and the ability to vote on this we're asked to vote on it, we're supposed to vote on it, and we have the ability to do that, and we should do that here rather than send it up. We're
So we
avoiding-
also have the ability basically to ignore the opinion of our town council, is what you're saying.
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. And we've actually had town council tell us that we were right to go into executive session before, and then had the state tell us that we were wrong. So this is not the first time. So I think we have the obligation to render an opinion about this.
Well, I don't know if we broke executive session veil, or if we violated it or not, so I'm not comfortable taking a position one way or the other. I believe we did the right thing, and I'd like the higher authority to weigh in.
Well, even if, which is, I don't think is true, but even if a majority of us decided to agree with you that yes, we violated the open meeting law, I think that we need to have the Attorney General's opinion before, I think that if we were to attempt to do any of these remedies that Mr. Hoke has suggested, without the Attorney General's ruling behind us, we would be opening ourselves up to more legal action.
Good point.
And I don't think we need to undertake anything that's questionably legal. So I want the Attorney General's opinion.
Also, and I really appreciate that you made that point, I think that I'd like to amend the motion that I made to include, to ask the Attorney General if they do find an open meeting law violation of this board, to look at the remedies that Mr. Hoke has proposed and see which of those, any of those or all of those could be an action taken by this board as a remedy. So I would like to amend my motion to include that.
It's okay with me.
Just question, aren't we allowed to ask for an extension because we want to get some clarification on something?
What are we gonna get?
We'd have to go to the Attorney General and ask for the extension
That's
anyway.
right.
But where would we get clarification?
Well,
I think,
because the challenge here is we're under a 14-day reality to make a decision. If we don't make a decision within 14 days, we're in violation.
No, not if we forward it to
No,
the
if we just
AG. We're
forward it
making
to
a
them,
decision.
We're fine.
We're making a decision. We're saying that we're not sure what we did if you follow this motion, and we want the AG to weigh in on it, including up to.
that's your response.
Okay.
Wait a sec, I have, 1 second, Kevin. So I did amend my own motion. Does anybody want to second the motion to amend?
Second?
Amend the motion, excuse me. Thank you. Discussion, Mr. Brogan.
So procedurally, Mark quoted, to start this discussion off, I think he read off procedure with regard to accusations of open meeting law violations. Is bumping this to the AG within the procedure?
Yeah, because after 14 business days, the public body must respond to the complaint in writing and must send the complaint in response and a description of any action the public body has taken to address it. So basically, at the same time, the body must send the Attorney General a copy of the response. So I read this to mean that your response to the open meeting law is, you know, you have the town council's opinion, you have the public input, and you're simply not sure if you violated the open meeting law. Therefore, we seek a clarification from the Attorney General.
That's
I think
correct.
that's a legitimate response. You know, I'm not a lawyer, but I think that's a legitimate response.
That is my position.
All right, so, thank you for your question. We do have a motion, and it has been seconded. Further discussion? All those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
So do we?
The amended motion.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, the amended
yeah,
motion.
Oh, and in your motion, direct the town manager to draft the response for the board to the AG. Otherwise, you have to write it.
As he just said it, yes.
Additional, we can.
Can we do that after, Mark?
We can do that after we take a position on this, let's see which way the vote goes, okay? All those in favor of the motion? Aye?
Aye.
That's 3 in favor, opposed?
No.
No.
So it's 3 to 2 in favor, so the motion passes. Motion to instruct the town manager to send a letter to the AG and supply all accompanying information, including Mr. Hoke's complaint and minutes of this meeting and executive session.
So moved?
Second.
Can we request that he instead work with the chair to formulate that response?
You can amend that motion.
Or that we all,
I will send the letter off for comments
This is-
before I send
Yeah,
it.
send the letter off for comments, comment directly
But
back
do
to
me a
the
favor.
town manager.
Yes, only come back to me
only
because
to
I don't
the
want to
town
violate the
manager,
open
do
meeting
not
law
debate it,
response.
okay? That's,
That's a double negative, though. That'd be a non-violation.
don't listen to him.
I will have the letter ready to go, hopefully by Friday.
The challenge with that is that if you say by committee and then you don't come back to open session committee and approve the final document, you're in violations.
Then I'll bring it back next Monday for approval.
That's what I think we have.
Yeah, that's a
Is
good
that
point.
still in the timeline for
Yeah,
response?
14 days from tonight to respond.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
So,
That, I apologize. So that's 4 in favor, 1 opposed. This
Can I
is
understand, actually, if, I value your opinion, Barry, so if you're gonna vote no, I'd love to hear why it is you'd vote no, because I might be influenced by what you
because I
think.
think we should have a response tonight, and I still think we should have a response tonight.
I thought you were advocating for getting more information.
No, I've never advocated for that.
But given that we have,
I think either we have to apply for an extension
yeah,
and request that, and then get information,
okay.
or we have a response tonight, and we're doing neither. And so I feel that this whole thing is,
We did have a
Out of order.
response, Barry.
okay, you guys say it's a response, to me it's a non-response, but that's just my opinion. It doesn't matter, I mean, I'm in the minority, so it's good, it's all good. As
Is there-
usual, I'm in the minority on a thing that's involving transparency and trying to follow procedures and orders, and, you know, that's okay.
I'm curious about what the other information is you would think we could get if we had an extension.
If we ask for an extension, we can request a clarification at the same time perhaps, and then come back and form a response based on that clarification
A clarification from,
from the Attorney General, which is what we're asking.
Asking for the Attorney
Are we-
General to do more than a clarification. We're asking the Attorney General to weigh in and interpret whether or not we violated the open meeting law.
I understand, which is basically saying, well, we don't know, you tell us.
Which
That's
is-
correct.
Which is not really a response.
Which is not a response, in
It's-
my opinion, but again, that's just my opinion.
Your response is you are unclear if you violated the open meeting law, so you're seeking the opinion of the Attorney General to clarify it. Maybe in that letter, you ask for the extension at the same time, saying, we really don't know how to respond until we hear from you. Please clarify, and then bring it back to the board to take a formal action. I think you're all
That's
saying
fair.
the same thing. I really do. Maybe I'm
I'm
wrong.
just really uncomfortable with this, but that's okay.
I think everybody's been uncomfortable with it, and
No,
I think that we're trying to get clarification on this, rather than take the law in our hands and be judge and jury upon ourselves on an issue that we may not be clear on.
But it is up to us to make the decision whether or not we feel that individually, as a board, but based on individual votes, we feel that we want. And if we do not
Fine,
feel,
make a motion then, because it won't impact the motion that we've already done.
the motion's already been made and done. The board's will is the board's will. I'm not gonna go against that.
Fair enough. Jane Allen?
I was wondering if anybody had an idea of how long it might take the DEA to get back.
Mark? you-
No idea.
It's the holiday season.
I'll put it
and
this way, the Attorney General has 90 days in which to usually respond to bylaws and things like that, so I'd expect something in that time.
If we can get an
I think-
answer,
I
when you
think
file this, we call the AG, and at the next meeting, we'll give an answer on how long a response may take.
If I may, it seems to me that our response is due to Mr. Hoag, and it therefore is to Mr. Hoag to determine whether what we're considering here is a response.
Precisely.
And I'd ask you if you think what we've talked about here is a response.
What you suggested is exactly what I think the law calls on and requires. And regardless of whether the selectmen send something to the Attorney General, I intend to comply with the law and submit my own package if the response I receive is not in keeping with what I think the law requires.
So may I infer, you expect us in our response to say, yes, we did, or no, we did not violate the open meeting law, and anything other than that, for instance, a request to the AG for a ruling is not considered a response by you?
I think that, yes, I think the board has an affirmative duty to decide, based on the information it has available to it now, whether it violated the open meeting law. If you go to the AG and say, we don't know if we violated the open meeting law, it looks extremely foolish to me for the board to do that.
but that's our choice.
It's your choice. As a point of order, I would like to follow up on my request that this email and spreadsheet be released to the public. So can the board discuss how that's going to be done so I can get hold of that as well as the general public?
Any information that was supplied during executive session, because we've already voted to release the executive session minutes, that information should be included within. And Allison, would you please
Yeah,
comply with
I
that
can.
request and turn it over? We'll post it on the website and get anybody who wants a copy.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Okay? So, I think we've concluded this matter for the moment, and we will wait to hear. Please find out how long the AG will take to weigh in on this.
Yep.
Okay?
Mr. Chairman, if we go back to the public hearing, reopen the public hearing?
Motion to reopen the public hearing for the Blood Farm earth removal permit.
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Chairman,
All
it's
in
come.
favor?
Aye.
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 Like,
Mr. Chairman, we have a letter in your packet from Richard Blood that it's come to their attention that the earth removal permit for the Blood Farm earth removal operation expired on September 16, 2016. At that time, our new facility had recently reopened after the devastating fire, and my father, Elliot Blood, was in severely declining health. The request for renewal of the permit was somehow overlooked. Blood Farm and the town of Groton have had a long and revered business relationship. It is my hope that we continue that relationship far into the future. Though I fully admit to those responsible have let the permit lapse, I respectfully request that you consider and renew the earth removal permit by allowing me to conduct the removal operation on parcel 15, map 106. You have a letter here from the earth removal committee. They considered the request and they voted unanimously to recommend to the Board of Selectmen that you renew the permit under the provisions of Chapter 134, earth removal permit, Section 134-3B, existing operations, and they've given you a list of conditions. I'd ask the board to consider approving that permit this evening.
This is a 3-year permit?
Two-year.
Thank you.
And the other request from the applicant is that normally earth removal permits expire in 2 years, and this permit was granted in September 2014. It expired in September 2016, and the earth removal committee is very comfortable with the Board of Selectmen taking into account the fact that Mrs. Blood died in March of 2016. Barney Blood died in October of 2016, and those were very much extenuating circumstances. And the track record of the Blood family is impeccable in terms of their compliance with the rules and regulations, and we've always had, as Mr. Blood said in his request, we've always had a good working relationship with this applicant.
And there's no question that I've walked this site and reviewed this site, and it's not very active.
There's not a lot of activity going on.
It's probably one of the cleanest sites I've ever seen as well, in terms of the way it's been maintained and whatnot. And needless to say, I personally understand the circumstances that led to the lapse and this permit and why it wasn't reapplied for. So, anything from board members? Alice?
I guess I'm just wondering, again, kind of as the newbie here, is this earth removal activity the activity unto itself, or is this in conjunction with a different construction project? Or?
Sand and graveling, is it not?
It is. It
Okay.
goes back to, actually, for many generations, when the earth removal bylaw was amended in 1984, it severely limited commercial earth removal operations, and it grandfathered existing operations.
Okay.
There were 2 existing operations at that time. One was Barney Blood's, the other is the Blacks on off Burnt Meadow Road. And those were the 2 existing operations, and there was a provision put in the bylaw that said the existing operations could continue under the rules and regulations of the Board of Selectmen, provided that the permit was renewed every 2 years.
Thank you.
Okay. Jack?
You mentioned something about a lapse, and I want to be sure I understand what it is that's unusual that we might be asked to make accommodations for here.
It's a time lapse. The permit that was granted in 2014 should have been renewed in September of 2016, but it was not due to the extenuating circumstances.
Are we looking to grant a continuous permit from the 16 expiration date, or are we looking to grant a permit from today?
Today, 2 years.
And what are the implications for the time
Right.
in between where there was no permit?
I don't think they did any earth removal operations during that time.
Are there any implications, though, for a lapse in
So they
the
lost that
granting of the permit legally, then?
Right, well,
Well, there's a provision in the regulations that talk about the terms and conditions and restrictions set forth in the regulations unless specifically waived by the board with the reasons for the waiver action clearly stated in writing. And unfortunately, for the Blood family, they were not able to take advantage of the Permit Extension Act. In 2010, the legislature granted a very generous permit extension act for 2 years for any existing permits. They renewed that in 2012 for a period of 4 years, which would have taken any existing permits, would have had 4 additional years to 2016, and the Blood family did not benefit from that simply because it had expired about the same time that their earth removal permit expired.
Well, firstly, I want to be really clear that I have no intention of not granting this permit. I just want to be sure I understand what it is I'm granting, so later someone doesn't come back to me and say, well, why'd you do that? Don't you know?
You'd be renewing the permit
But
for a
hold on.
period of 2 years and granting a waiver for the lapse of the permit.
Oh, okay, so we're simply granting a waiver for the lapse.
Correct.
Okay, very good. And there are no implications for any work done during that lapse.
I don't believe there was any work done.
Great, and then lastly, I'll say, to Josh's point, Mr. Blood used to love to tell stories, and one story that he used to love to tell was about a guy who ran the earth removal project early on, and the mess that he made, and the trouble that he got in, and how he went and took it out on that guy's hide, because he was proud of his operation and wanted his operation to be an upstanding one that everybody could be proud of. And he used to love telling that story a lot of times.
And we have evidence of that in the record, because when he allowed that individual to remove sand and gravel from his pit, he had him sign a letter saying that he would comply with all the rules and regulations of the town of Groton. And when he didn't, he canceled the deal. So that's a true story.
Yeah.
Becky?
Michelle, could you just tell us who is on the committee? I don't see those names in place on this.
The committee is made up of 2 individuals appointed at large by the Board of Selectmen, and that's Bob Hannanen and Tom Delaney. It has representatives from the Planning Board, that's John Geiger. Representative from the Conservation Commission is Eileen McHugh, and there's a 5th member who is Tom Delaney. Bob, and Ed Perkins is the chair, and he's appointed by the Board of Selectmen. You're welcome.
Barry, do you have something?
So this is a town bylaw that grants these 2 individual properties these civil rights, providing that they renew every 2 years.
Right.
Does the bylaw allow the Board of Selectmen to waive that renewal?
Yes.
The regulations do.
The regulations do,
Mhm.
and the regulations are superseded by the bylaw or referred to the bylaw, or?
The regulations are allowed and approved by the Board of Selectmen. The bylaw authorizes you or directs you to come up with regulations.
Okay.
And that's what
Thank you.
you've done.
All right,
Great.
want to make sure that we're not
Yep,
violating the
no,
bylaw.
you're right on point.
Any questions, since this is a public hearing from members of the public? Comments? Seeing none, motion to close the public hearing, because do we not take the vote after closing the public hearing?
Correct.
So moved?
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion to approve the earth removal permit is,
I do it as recommended by the Earth Removal Committee.
and the waivers.
Yes.
It's,
I would do 2 separate
Yeah.
motions, please.
I move that we approve the waiver. I think we have to do the waiver first,
I agree with
right?
that, that's right.
I move that we approve the waiver of the 2-year lapse for the blood operation earth removal permit.
It wasn't a 2-year lapse. It was just the lapse.
It's a 1-year
I would call
lapse.
it
The lapse, so
The
strike
lapse.
the,
Is that fair?
strike the time, so
Okay. Motion to approve the lapse in the permit.
waive.
Waive the lapse, thank you. Has that been seconded?
Second?
All those in favor? Aye. And?
And then I move that we reinstate,
No, approve.
approve the earth removal permit for the blood operation effective, be effective today and go for 2 years.
That's when you grant the permit, correct?
Effective today for a period of 2 years.
Motion's been made
Second.
and seconded. Further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Excellent.
Thank you for the explanation, Sean.
And I'm glad this has been cleaned up.
Mr. Chairman, that concludes the town manager's report, that concludes the public hearings. The selectmen have left liaison reports and minutes approval.
Well, is there other business by any member of the Board of Selectmen? Hearing none. Liaison reports. Barry pointed out that some of us believe that he may be a liaison to something he's not, and that we may not be aware of our liaison positions. So Mark sent those out again for clarification, so we all should take a look at them. And if there are any issues, and I'm as guilty as the first person for not understanding one of mine, and
I just think it's funny that I'm the liaison for everything.
I think
Because you
it's
weren't at the
great.
meeting.
I'll
Barry.
second that.
I think it's funny.
when you're not at a meeting, sometimes.
Except the one except you're not for the one you went to.
That's the whole point, right?
Yeah, so
This is a common
Becky?
thing.
Yeah, now, early on after the election, I believe there was some reference to a liaison policy.
Yep.
Where is that?
It has not made it to an agenda item.
It has, Barry and I are working on it, we just haven't brought it back.
There's been many other important pressing things.
This could be one of the quickest
superseded.
policies ever
So,
constructed.
okay, so there's
That's
nothing
not
written
quick.
that I can find anyplace that tells me, okay,
Typically, if you're the liaison to another committee, that you should be looking at their agendas, and if there's something that affects the Board of Selectmen, you can speak to the chair as to whether or not, of that committee, as to whether or not you should attend, and then you don't even need to speak to them. You can attend any meeting as a member of the public or as this board that you want to do. But it is nice as the liaison to have a rapport with the chair of the committee to
Right.
which you serve as liaison for, so if something comes up, you can be made aware of it and, make time so you can attend their meeting. And conversely, the other way around, if we know who the liaisons are to this board from the other committees, we could open an invitation to them when something comes up. So maybe you should consider doing that as part of your policy.
It's almost done, it'll be ready soon.
Under advisement. Any other reports?
So liaison report from the nonprofit council. I'm gonna have to be reminded of the time, but the Groton Schools Carols and Bells ceremony is open to the public.
lessons and.
Lessons and carols, open to the public, and that's on the 8th, correct?
Yes,
Okay, thank you. And I think it starts at 7.
I think so too.
It's a wonderful ceremony. It's worth seeing once in your lifetime in Groton. It's worth seeing many times, but certainly once. So please think about heading over there.
And it might snow on that evening. Just in time.
Of course.
How beautiful.
Yes, thank you. Anything further from anyone? Seeing nothing, we have two sets of minutes. One is a set of minutes from September 25th, 2017. That was regular session, was it not?
Yes, it was.
Yes, it doesn't say regular, so just,
No, budget guidance meeting.
I get it. Any questions on that set of minutes? Any motions?
I move we approve the minutes of September 25th, 2017, meeting with the budget guidance meeting with the finance committee.
Seconded.
All those in favor? And we have another set of minutes from November 13th, 2017. Any
Yeah.
questions on those?
So note that there is a change in red from the original packet that was requested and Don submitted into here. You'll find that on the second page, I believe.
Did not see that.
Or you'll find that, excuse me, on page
Third
3.
page?
About the middle of page 3. So as now written, they are accurate in my opinion, but the ones in your packet differ.
Make a
The
motion
original
that we approve the minutes of the 13th as amended.
I'll second.
Hold on one moment, please.
It's on page 20.
I'm there. I saw the change. I'm just, okay, I reviewed this. Motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
That was unanimous. Seeing nothing else other than the word adjournment, we're adjourned.
Good night, everybody.
Good
And
night.
Mark,